Okay, so again, welcome. I'm Marianne Lippa, and I'm joined here by my co-presenter, Esther Raw. Today, we're going to talk about the following topics. So understanding what are the basics of negotiating, so that kind of serves as the foundation for the discussion. What are the different components of the faculty job offer and what can and is possible to negotiate for? We're going to talk about ways that you can conduct research on how to best prepare for the negotiating process. We'll also have some information on how to negotiate well and what to do and what not to do. So some tips on that, as well as various negotiating scenarios and some resources that are going to be very helpful and beneficial for you as you go through this process. So I think what's really important to understand about negotiating is that there's kind of a basic framework that really serves as as the foundation for why you should negotiate. I think sometimes it can be a bit confusing or ambiguous as to what's the benefit of negotiating. And so I think if you understand kind of what is the impact that negotiating can have, it really helps you kind of understand the overall process a little bit better. So it's really important to remember that your future pay raises on an annual basis really depend on what your base salary is. So whatever that salary is that you start out with is going to really then have, kind of a compounding effect moving forward in terms of those future pay raises. So that's, I think, important to remember. Additionally, your retirement benefits also depend on what that base salary is, because there's a certain percentage that is typically associated with that. And then kind of aside from the salary financial component, the other thing that's going to be important to remember is that you want to ensure that you are set up well for success in terms of tenure and making sure that that environment and the factors surrounding the environment are going to enable you to be successful at achieving tenure. And so that might be that you are perhaps receiving more time or more resources for research, for writing, and also perhaps for teaching as well. So it's important to remember that with negotiating, most institutions do expect you to negotiate. Even if you don't have another offer in hand, they do expect you to negotiate for some things that might be of interest to you. It's really important to remember that there is that expectation. So it's not unusual to want to negotiate because most institutions understand that and they recognize that. It's really important to remember that the best time to negotiate is after the offer is made, but before you've accepted it. Because once you've accepted it, the leverage is not there anymore, right? Because they already know that you're going to be joining them. So it's really important that you make sure that the timing is key, which is after the offer is made, but before you've actually accepted it. That being said, it's equally important to wait until you have that offer to negotiate. So you wouldn't want to be negotiating before you have the offer and kind of jump too far ahead, right? So again, you want to wait till you have that offer and then, of course, negotiate after that offer is made, but before you go ahead and accept it. It's important to think about what are the different needs and the different aspects of the institution as you go through the negotiating process. So what that means is thinking about what is the mission of the institution, what are the different resources available, what is the culture. All those things really come into play when you're going through the negotiating process. And then finally, you want to think about this as very much of a win-win scenario and structure. This is not intended to be adversarial. You want to make sure that you are maintaining professionalism. It's collegial. So what that means is you want to think about how this is a benefit to them, but that also they are a benefit to you, right? So it's very much that win-win structure. So think about what is the mindset of the department chair, the dean, because whether or not you accept or decline the offer, you are going to be a colleague. You may cross paths with them again. You may be collaborating with them. So again, you want to make sure that this is very much not adversarial and very much collegial and professional in the process. So let's talk about what are some of the different factors that can affect and impact negotiations. The first being, what is the type of institution that this is, right? So is this a private institution? Is it a public institution? The size of the institution, is it large or is it a small private college, university? Is the emphasis more on research or teaching? So, is this a research intensive institution or is it more of a teaching intensive institution? in terms of, a flagship campus for the institution or a branch satellite campus. Is it also a non-union campus or a unionized campus? So all of those factors do have a part in the negotiating process. You also want to think about, well, what are some of the different pressures, both externally and internally, that might be affecting the negotiating process? So for example, in terms of external offers, I think one of the things that's important to think about is, can you benchmark some of the peer institutions and positions that are at some of the other similarly situated institutions that are comparable? You might also think about what is the internal equity within that department or within that school, right? So that can certainly play a part in the negotiating process in terms of other faculty members' salaries and what resources they have as well. So that structure certainly does come into play with the compensation, with the salary constraints, and then similarly with the budget, right? So what are some of the resources they have from a financial perspective, and what are some of the budgetary constraints that they might also have as well? You also want to think about, well, what is your value that you bring to the institution, right? So, what is your contribution and your impact that you would have in terms of that, perhaps of the research, perhaps the teaching aspect, perhaps both. And then it's also important to think about, well, what is the position value to you, right? So how does this position fit into your own professional and career development and path? So let's take a quick look at what are the different components of a tenure track assistant professor job offer. So you'll see a list here. Some will have an asterisk next to them, and the asterisk simply denotes what is possible to perhaps be negotiated depending on the institution. So in the job offer itself, it would include the start date, it would include the title, the salary, if there's any reimbursement or any kind of money that's set aside for relocation costs. It would have, conference travel information, professional development, if there's money and resources set aside for that. For those of you that are in a STEM field, the lab startup package. It would also include what is your teaching responsibility and advising load. So thinking about that. If there are opportunities for summer salary or teaching opportunities in the summertime. It would also include maternity, family leave information, general benefits, which is what we refer to, which would be health, retirement, those areas. What would be the expectation in terms of performance, tenure, salary review, intellectual property, if that's pertinent to your position, visa assistance, if relevant, thesis completion, dual career issues. And Esther's going to talk a little bit later about dual career hires, and then finally the decision date. So as you can see, there are some things on here that could be negotiated. Certainly the start date, the salary, any funds for relocating, professional development and conference travel is also something that if it's not necessarily provided, it might be something that you could ask for. So here, is kind of a nice summary of what are the different components of the job offer. And again, depending on the institution, some of these are going to be negotiable and some of them are not. Again, it's all dependent on that institution itself. Okay, so in terms of the offer, the salary is going to be probably the main component of the offer itself. And you want to think about the salary as, it's the amount of your base pay, right? So what are the different things to keep in mind about that salary? So is it 9 months of a salary, or is it the 12 months for the salary? And if it's just the 9 months, are there any opportunities for summer salary to teach a course over the summer? Do they offer that as an option? You also would want to think about, well, what is, how long is that salary guaranteed, right? So is your salary going to be based on grant funding potentially, or, what are the different kind of resources that are supporting that salary? Are there any policies that the institution has on outside consulting work? That's going to be an important question to think about if it's not mentioned throughout the process. In terms of the appointment, you want to think about, okay, is this, the full-time tenure track? And if so, what are the parameters affiliated with that? What is the length of that initial contract? When is it renewable? If you have a successful reappointment review. So what are the terms of that? And then if you have received a joint appointment at that institution, which department is going to be considered your home, right? So which one is going to be kind of more your home for the institution? And then also, is the tenure criteria similar, or does it are there some differences for each department? So that's going to be really important to think about. In terms of preparing for the negotiating process, some things that can really help you better understand and be better prepared for this step is to really think about you and your priorities, right? So you want to think about, how does this particular institution compare to other ones that you've interviewed with? Which institution do you feel is going to allow you to be most supported and complete your best work and be most successful, right? So thinking about which one is going to allow you to achieve those goals. Do you have a geographic preference, right? So thinking about, okay, is this an area where I would want to live in? Will I be happy there? Also, it's important to think about, what is your financial bottom line? So if you need to relocate, you certainly may need to factor in the cost of living changes that might potentially bring. And then lastly, is there someone else, such as a partner or a family member, who would be affected by your decision? So these are all things to really kind of think about and really discuss before you get to the negotiating stage. Now, in terms of the preparation, it's also important to think about and learn more about the position and institution as well. So really researching this role, researching the institution, thinking about the institution as a whole, like what is the rank, what is the type of institution, what are the resources they might have, how large, what is the size of your department. So ways that you can do that would be to certainly review the institution's website. Typically there will be an FAQ section, or sometimes, it's helpful to go onto like the prospective student section of the website, because it gives a very nice summary of the history of the school, the mission statement, any points of pride that are particularly noteworthy, any initiatives that they are focusing on. Another resource on the institution's website would be the webpage for the Office of the Provost. Typically, there is information there for both prospective faculty, and then also there is typically a faculty handbook that would be available to view as well. You also will want to look at the departmental website, thinking about, who are the potential colleagues you might be with. So checking out their bios, their profiles, the course listings and offerings. In addition, we would recommend just Googling the institution to see if there's any major news about it recently, also looking on social media. So all of these resources are accessible and certainly easy to research. You also want to think about, how does this particular faculty position and role contribute to the department overall or the institution overall? So again, as you start to prepare for the negotiating stage, this research can really be helpful and beneficial to you. So as I mentioned, so one of the resources that can be very helpful is looking at the prospective faculty section of the institution's website. So this is a screenshot of the one here at Penn through the Office of the Vice Provost for Faculty. So as you can see, there's different resources on here for you. The other thing to think about is processing and kind of synthesizing the information that you have gathered throughout the interviewing process, right? So there's a lot of information that can be a bit more insightful and helpful once you've gone through the interviewing stage. So thinking about perhaps, what you've learned when you've spoken with other faculty in that department, how, for example, have they started up their own labs, what resources did they utilize? You might also get a sense of perhaps what they've shared with you in terms of what cannot be negotiated. Some things are very much fixed and may not have any flexibility for negotiating. The other thing to think about is, have you gathered some information on what the standard teaching load or different preps would be? What is that expectation for that? What are the different resources that they have for first year faculty to help them with that transition and that kind of, experience as they start out in their first year? Is there any information that you've learned about summer teaching or any overload teaching? Sabbaticals certainly might be a question that you have, more information on during the interviewing process. And then lastly, what is the tenure process like at that department in school, and what is kind of the success rate of that, right? So just, some of these areas that hopefully you've had some insight and perspective from the potential colleagues that you would be working with. So one of the other ways that you can gather and obtain information is to kind of utilize your own network, right? Make those connections so you can talk to mentors, ask them for advice, alumni, and colleagues. So, perhaps some of the questions you might consider asking would be, does this particular range of salary, seem in line with what an assistant professor in the field makes at your institution? Thinking about what were some of their helpful resources to them when they were preparing for interviews and negotiating offers for different assistant professor positions. And then lastly, how did they assemble and negotiate the startup budget for their current lab? You also might consider connecting with postdocs or faculty that were recently affiliated with the institution. That's sometimes also a helpful step in the process as well. So now I'm going to show you some information online where you can research faculty salaries. Certainly there's a lot of information on these various websites, but I just wanted to give a couple screenshots for you to take a look at. The first is through the Chronicle of Higher Education. Faculty salary information is available for you to view. It goes back as far as 2012 to 2013, and then the most recent academic year that they have collected data for is 2020 to 2021. And you can search by different title positions. So that's helpful. You can search by institutions, by state. So all of that can be really customizable in your search parameters. And the website is listed at the top of the slide for accessing the data on the Chronicle. Another helpful website for you is the American Association of University Professors, AAUP is the acronym. And they have a faculty compensation survey results tool. The figures on here are averages, so it's important to remember that. And their data starts in 2016, 2017, and continues through 2021, 2022. And again, you can search by salary, by rank, by gender. So a lot of great information there in terms of salary data. The other thing to keep in mind is that at public universities, faculty salaries are public record. So that is something that is published, usually through either the university system itself or through a major state newspaper. So for example, the Office of the President at University of California, they have the information available. You might also find information in the large state newspaper, like such as the Texas Tribune. There are other general salary resources as well that you can find some information on, which would include Glassdoor, PayScale, and salary.com.
For some of you, not just the salary, but your startup lab packages are equally important. And these are some considerations you want to have. These startup packages will vary, as Marianne was saying earlier, depending on the type of institution you are choosing to enter. So that's something to keep in mind and at the top of your sort of, at the top of your list in terms of thinking about when to negotiate and how to negotiate startup packages. Some things that you want to think about are how long can you do research before you have to personally go out and secure your own additional grants? Sometimes the institutions have a set number of years for your funding before you have to go and find your own startup costs, but you may be able to negotiate what your funding pays for. And some of the components of the startup budget may include lab, space, and the location. Location is also key. I had a student one year that I was working with that had a wonderful package, great salary, but his startup package was in a different city outside of the university. It was at a different branch. And so that was a deal breaker for him. So that's something to definitely consider. Also, does your startup lab package include personnel and their staff salaries. And, that might include postdocs, grad students, lab techs, also equipment, whether it be software and things like that, and other research support. You want to get an understanding of the structure of the startup fund and be sensitive to certain things that are possible and also not possible, depending on the type of institution you will be at. Again, the personnel, the space, the location, those things all may be, part of the package. And one or many of these things may or may not be a deal breaker. So these are things to consider. As Marianne had mentioned earlier, if there are constraints in the budget, you can suggest win-win solutions, such as proposing to share equipment, proposing to share grad students, personnel, and you want to have a good, strong basis for why your requests are necessary for your research. One way to do that is to create a detailed startup budget and to prepare a brief one-page summary of your equipment needs. And having this ready to go before you walk into the negotiating discussion will arm you and prepare you for the conversation that will ensue afterwards. More information is available on the following websites and professional association journals: the ASCB, AAS, Nature, Science, etc. Other resources as well are your advisors and those who are also in the field. Marianne mentioned earlier dual hires. Now, this is definitely a possibility. It requires a bit more research, a bit more work on your part. This is possible at some universities, and they will consider it. Now, again, you have to consider where does the institution rank and what are their resources? What type of institution are they? Because that will matter in terms of will they be able to hire both of you at the same time. And when we say dual hire, we're talking about partners who are also PhDs, postdocs, academic hires. You want to approach this request delicately and after your offer has been made, not before. There are times when this timing doesn't work out perfectly. So you have to kind of walk that delicate balance. But if at all possible, it's recommended that you ask for it after your own offer has been put on the table. And of course, you have to consider other limiting requests as well. When you're applying for a job, you may have an option or like a fill out form. Sometimes, a lot of times these days, it's online, and we get this asked a lot in our office. What should I put for salary? Our recommendation is to just simply write negotiable if that's possible, and if it only allows you to put in a 0 in the form, if it requires you to put a numerical value, put a 0 in the form. That will be your best bet, and then you can leave that conversation open for another time. Some of your applications may not require this early on, but we have seen it sometimes with some institutions. Your goal is to delay the discussion of compensation and specifics of the research and lab budget until after your actual offer is made. So like the salary and your academic appointment. You can sort of keep them at bay by saying the following statements: salary is not the most important issue. Now, emphasize the word most important issue to me. What is more important is the role in institution. Also, I'm open to any reasonable startup package, and I'm sure that the institution provides sufficient resources for tenure success. So again, and Marianne has mentioned this as well, you want to set yourself up for success down the line for tenure. And so all of these negotiations are really important to keep in mind. So you've got your offer, and it looks like the offer you want to take, and you're so excited and you can pop some bubbly. If the offer is given over the phone, and sometimes it's given over email, it can be a verbal offer or it can be an informal written offer. Usually you'll be contacted by the department chair or the search committee chair if it's a different person. You will want to make sure and confirm that offer is actually an offer. You may have to request it in writing. It should have a salary figure attached to it. And unless that unless that's there, it's not an actual offer. Sometimes after a job talk or after an interview days, you might casually get back asked by someone, if I made you an offer, would you take it? That is not an official offer. They're sort of feeling you out in terms of where you stand. You will want to make sure that your salary is attached to it. And so you'll want to get that in writing. And if you haven't gotten in writing, you will want to ask them for it. You don't want to negotiate anything on the spot, but you will want to ask them for some time to think about it. You'll want to say, I'd like several days to think about this offer and think about questions that you might have. And also, if there are parameters in terms of when you can reply to them, that also may be negotiable. Again, it's very important to get this offer in writing. Some employers will want to make sure they finalize the offer before actually writing up all the parameters. So they'll go back and forth with you before they actually give you the written letter that you have to sign and send back. Again, you want to make sure that you receive this letter and email, and it includes salary, start date, and the date by which you need to send your decision. These again all can be negotiable, as Marianne had put on the list. And if there are any changes as you're going back and forth with some of these parameters, you want to make sure that those changes are again put in a new letter, and that's super important. If it's on email, you want to make sure that whatever's captured on email or verbally, that's in another formal letter. Your best bet before actually negotiating is to understand what is possible with the terms of your offer, and to also think about your own priorities and think about your partner's priorities if you have one, and also family priorities if you have one. Many institutions won't move so far away from their actual original offer. So it's important to put your requests on the table, your asks, in a diplomatic manner, and have a strong rationale for them. You will want to make sure that you don't make anything personal to you. Coming into the conversation with data in hand is your best weapon. You want to consider negotiating in light of the type of institution it is. And that's why we've been emphasizing it's so important to know who is your audience and what are they capable of, and what is important to them, because that will be different across different applications that you have out there. You might have heard from another friend or a colleague that, oh, they got this package. Now, you never want to assume that, quote unquote, any such offers of things that you hear are normal for your field. Things are considered on a case by case basis. You don't go on the assumption that there is a normal per se. You don't want to go in with a list of demands. You don't want to go in with negotiating every tiny little thing. You don't want to negotiate one thing at a time, but rather bring all the asks at the table at the time. And you don't want to, again, we said this earlier, negotiate things so that you are on the spot and deciding right in front of them. And you don't definitely want to be confrontational. Again, academia, especially some of your fields, are small. The world is small. And so it is very likely that even after this particular negotiation, you may come across them at a conference. You might be on the interview trail again in another a few years, hopefully not, but you never know. And so you just want to always keep that communication open and non-confrontational. Really highly recommend involving your advisors and mentors and others that are in your field. They will be the best folks to be whispering in your ear. Continue to express gratitude for the opportunity to the institution, even as you're communicating back and forth with them. You want to have just an easygoing tone. Be polite, enthusiastic, and kind throughout the negotiation process. And as we said, come ready and armed with research and data before you go into these conversations. Again, we talked about this, mentioned this. understanding the institution, and also realizing what is the most important thing to you. Is it important that you are in a city that you like and you have family near? Is it important that you are in a specific department so that your research is situated in a specific department? There are different asks that you may have, and so you want to think about those things and prioritize them in your mind. You want to frame your requests as questions, not as statements. And again, keep that open diplomatic tone. You want to be reasonable in your requests too. We can't go from 0 to 100. You can try to see if they can possibly meet you in the middle. And know exactly what you need to be successful. And so again, some research on your part to know what it is you need to carry out your research plans, and also think down the line and think about setting yourself for success for the tenure process. So some scenarios that we can think about. Many of you will apply to several institutions, and you may have several offers at the table. You may have job A that has offered you a job, but you really would prefer to work at job B, but they are a little bit later in their timeline. And so you're sort of wishing that you could know what was going on with job B. If that ever happens, then you would want to let job B know that you've got an offer from job A, and that you want to do that as soon as possible, so that if you are in the running at that institution, that they can hustle with the process. And this has happened before. And so you can certainly keep your communication lines open and reiterate to them, I really am very interested in this position at your institution, and would love to know, what is your timeline? When is the decision-making process going to occur? When will I know a little bit more information? Because I do have this other offer on the table. Now, you want to make sure that you don't make up any offers. You don't want to make up any fake offers. Again, the world is small and folks know people, people know other people. And so you don't want to have, someone check up on that and catch you, in a bluff. So you always want to be sincere. Sincerity goes a long way in the job search. And if you have multiple offers that are more than beyond job A, job B, and you have a job C and D also, then you want to make sure you look at the offerings across all institutions, and you want to prioritize your top two, and then be quick to decline the rest after some thought. You can use the offers that you have on the table as leverage, but also remember that department chairs want to know that you're serious and that you're considering their institution. And so you'll probably be able to tell quickly which ones you can narrow down, because some parameters won't be what you'd like. So it is advised to sort of narrow down that as soon as possible. So wrapping up negotiations, when you're wrapping up again, and when you're accepting an offer, you want to make sure that you have your letter in writing. Again, a verbal offer or an offer on the fly on your interview day, or the day that you give a job talk, is not a formal offer. You want to make sure that you thank everyone who has helped you along in the process. This includes maybe the person who set up your schedule for your job talk, maybe your advisor. You want to notify other institutions who have also interviewed you to say that you've accepted a job offer and that you're going to be withdrawing your application from their search. And when you make this known, you have to know that you're making a commitment and that you're going to be moving forward in that commitment. When you're declining an offer, again, be very gracious. You want to thank the other institutions for their interest and that you enjoyed interviewing with them and that you appreciate their time in considering your candidacy. Again, the world is small. You never know when you're going to encounter these folks again. I've had students come back and say, I actually met so-and-so again at a conference and I remember interviewing with them. So you just never know when you're going to encounter them in the future.